Welcome back to Indie Housing Market. I'm Kyle Morris with Morris Property Group and FC Tucker.
I'm Shelly Walters with the FC Tucker Company and the Shelly Walters Realty Group.
And we have like one of my favorite guests. I'll let you introduce yourself. But I mean, a lot of this is about stats. This entire podcast is a lot about stats and then how you extrapolate that into trends and what's going on. So I'll let you introduce yourself.
Awesome. Brad Coffing, Director of Housing Insights with Mibor.
Right. And this is what you do. You take data and extrapolate it, except you do it on a much larger scale than us. So we're very hyper-focused. We are basically north side focused. I mean, I sell everywhere, you sell everywhere. It doesn't really matter. We've tried to do it with more areas. It'd be like a 6-hour podcast, and you would just like boring. Put your head through a plate glass window, right? But what's going on the north side generally tends to be a lead indicator of what's going to happen in other areas. So I think that's why it really, really works. The only time it's a little bit different is like when you have COVID and all of a sudden downtown kind of was like screeching halt. That's very rare. I mean, right? No, I agree. But you have to look at all the donut counties. Like I think we're 16 counties. 17. Oh, man, we snuck another one in.
Park County.
Really?
Have you ever been down there? Park County?
Tell me a city. I'm from Morgan County originally, so you got to give me, like, if we're talking gospel.
Marshall. Rockville.
Yeah, I've been to Rockville. Yeah.
Covered bridges.
Yeah. Okay. So it's getting larger and larger. We could always discuss that too. At what point? I
just wish we could do a whole state. That would be so
That's what I was going to say.
Yeah. Just because it would be so much easier because we do sell in a lot of different places. And because of COVID, people are moving out. And then I don't have access to the information like right over the line. Yeah. It's kind of like 96th Street. If I go across 9601, I can't do anything with that one.
So it's interesting. So I think we should do it. I don't think it will happen for a very long time because
it'll put somebody out of business, right?
That's the fear. Like people make decisions based off of fear, not reality. And so that's the fear is that larger agents from bigger metro areas will come out and, it's kind of like this is our turf type stuff. And I have dealt with it. I've dealt with that in Kokomo. We have dual membership, my team does. And so we have IRMLS, or ERMLS as I like to call it. It just sounds good. It reminds me of Garfield. Remember he had ERML?
Yeah.
Yeah, Garfield had
remember the weirdest stuff.
Dude.
Buddy, right?
Yeah. So Odie.
Wow,
yeah.
That's a deep cut, man.
It is.
That's impressive. Okay.
I was a big Garfield nerd back in the day.
You digress.
Yeah, I digress. Anyways, so where was I going with that? So anyways, people are afraid of that. And like, no, I have access to all this data, but you also have one that's up in the region. You have one that's over by Richmond, even though I sell out in Louisville. That kind of tiptoes between IRMLS and the Richmond one. You have one, Bloomington has one. You have one over in Terre Haute, right? Then you have Evansville, and that's not even all of them. That's just like off the top of my head. What I for sure know that we have with technology these days, I can become an expert. That's just my personal belief structure. Obviously, I'm saying that in a way that it is beneficial to my current viewpoint anyway. So I totally recognize what I'm doing there. But I do think it's a thing. Like, obviously, I do know certain areas better. I know McCordsville very, very well because I live in McCordsville. I actually sell less in McCordsville than I do anywhere else. And for me, it's not intentional. I kind of like it because when I go home, it's the only time I get to kind of clock out because I'm clocked in like nonstop. I don't even market to my neighborhood. If somebody approaches me, I'll 100% sell it. Yeah. I don't need to be walking around with my kids and somebody's like, "Hey, why haven't you mulched your yard?" Or
like if you're a chef,
no. You're walking your kids and they ask you what everybody asks is, "How's the market?"
Yeah. I mean, I get that stuff anyways, but that's just there's some agents who love that. There's some people who don't. I sell enough; I don't have to. And I'm not saying that matters, but I don't know. I do if somebody approaches me, and so I just really kind of disagree. Like, if I'm a professional, I spend time and energy. I can know an area.
It's relationships too.
Yeah.
Like there's that time that you put in getting to know people and people getting to know you, and obviously you guys are really good about getting the data, getting the numbers, showing the expertise, and
providing that to our clients,
providing the services,
that we aren't just kind of going on what we've heard from 21 and 2022 or the neighbor down the street, because that's always something I hear. The neighbor down the street sold it in 2 days.
I know.
What year was that?
I just don't think we'll ever go to it, or if we do, it'll be 8 years down the road. Where some of those areas have
I'm gonna put that on my
recognized in technology that they're okay, because they're going to want to start to sell in other areas, right? Because there's amazing agents everywhere, and there's no reason a Muncie agent couldn't sell Indy if they all had access to the same thing and could provide the same level of customer service. Now that's dependent on what that agent wants to do, but it doesn't just go one way, right? Like that's a two-way street, and it could help other people's businesses as well. For me, the biggest struggle I have is sometimes when I go into some of these areas, I don't get the same high level of communication and professionalism I have to in Indy, right, just to operate. But I've literally had an agent within the past 60 days say that they didn't want to work with us because we were from Indy and they were up in Kokomo. And we're like, yeah, like we sell a crap ton up in Kokomo. And so they didn't want to dance with us, detriment to their seller.
Correct.
Yep. And then 30
Isn't
days.
that a fiduciary responsibility issue?
Take that up with my board, not me.
Hey,
Well,
Brad.
it wouldn't even be my board because it's it'd be IRMLS.
yeah,
but
I don't know.
and then they circled back to us 30 days later and took
So
our
anyway,
took our offers.
we
Ridiculous.
digress.
For less money.
We have Brad here to talk about the stats. Can we have a whole?
We have Brad here to just pontificate about market stuff. I feel
Yeah.
like.
Market stuff.
Yeah.
So, what do you feel in regards to what you were saying in the beginning of the year as how the year ended?
So I will fully admit that I don't have an ego about being right. And it's actually kind of fun.
Married, I see, huh? There we go. I feel you, brother.
I thought the same
I'm actually
thing.
very used to being wrong.
Yeah.
So, no.
Or being
but
told
it's-
that, right?
Well, tomato. But it's fun to, I take what I do very serious, but I don't take myself very serious.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
I do.
So,
100%
It would be
do.
hard to when you're trying to predict things that will or won't happen
Yes.
a
Yeah.
year in advance.
and also then you start putting yourself into the numbers as opposed to just trying to look at the numbers. That's two totally different things. The other thing about forecasting that I don't like is, a lot of people will say all kinds of stuff, and there's really no penalty to being wrong.
Yeah.
But also, like, nobody's going to remember what people say a year ago. But I do care what I said a year ago because that changes how I think for the next year. And,
Yeah.
you try to learn what you got wrong and why it was wrong. And
Like what
so
outliers contributed to you being wrong, right? Like that's what we look at.
what changed.
Yeah.
Well, this year was
Or
a
what didn't
weird
happen.
year that I don't know anybody could have predicted where we were going because it's just changing constantly.
Yeah. And so what I did last year, and we were kind of talking about this too. So in November of 23, we were looking out for 2024 and trying to say, like, what do we think the year could potentially look like, right? And so that's really all that we try to do with this, is just try to set some kind of expectations of a benchmark. So as the year starts going on, we're like, oh, okay, we're higher than what we thought, or we're lower than what we thought. Why is that?
Yeah.
Right?
Mm-hmm.
And so what we said last year was we thought sales would be up 10% year over year, and that was based on getting 3 cuts starting in June. And we had kind of talked about this, was if you are going to get that cut in June, the market's going to lead up to that. It's not like all of a sudden we get a cut and then bang, it starts, right?
Right.
The bond
They
market
lit-
is leading the way along that
Right.
one.
They literally
Yeah.
avoid that. Right. So like we start to see an impact pre the Fed meeting.
That's the thing.
And by the time the Fed meets, our rates have usually already adjusted. Because what you don't want is you don't want to run on the bank.
Right.
Right. And so if it's like, hey, rates went down to 6.3 today, and everybody comes out, usually when they just say they're going to make a cut, we started coming down 3 weeks before.
Yeah, the
that,
mortgage
2
rates
weeks.
are also
Not
a
connected,
prediction
but-
of where the rates are going to be in 60, 90,
Yes.
3 months, So it's a little bit of that game. So that's also why it kind of leads to. So if we were going to have that cut in June, late April, May, you would start to see those yields fall, right? You would start to see the mortgage rates kind of coming down. And the way you see the market interact with rates here, especially here, like, it reacts pretty quickly. Like, the closer you get to 6% here, activity starts really picking up. You can
It would
see
have been
in new
nice if it
listings, you can see
stayed
the
around
pendings.
6.2
That's
a
the tricky.
little longer.
You know what?
Right.
The weird part about when that happened back in September, when we went down to like 6.2,
Yeah.
people rested on their laurels because they thought it would go down again.
Yes.
I think a lot of people thought it was the start of
Correct.
of it. But so
And then
it
it
was
went right back up.
simultaneously the drop in the ball.
yeah,
You know what I mean?
and we talked about this, since like May, you had saw, the rates coming down slowly and surely, and we dropped nearly a percentage point, a full point from May to September before the actual cut even happened, right?
Mm-hmm.
So again, if we would have gotten that June cut, you would have saw April starting to come into line, May coming into line. That puts us catching the tail end of that spring bump, fully the summer bump, right? I mean, we start getting to that, but the rates held on. Inflation was sticky. Employment was stronger than kind of what most people thought the economy was at that time. Rate cuts kept getting pushed back, and so we kind of missed that spring. Spring bump that we usually.
We were talking about that. So Shelly and I, around November, December of last year, we were predicting a very strong spring market, and it was.
We were
basically warning people.
Yeah, we kept saying, be ready or get your house on the market now.
And it happened.
Or have the house, prepped.
Yeah. But
You always
it
need
did
to go
happen,
ahead.
though. Like when we ran the numbers, like it did happen. It lasted 4 weeks. The last week of March
And
to
in
the third
specific
week of
pockets,
April.
too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So it was weird that it really did happen, and then it just was
rates went up
crickets.
then.
Yeah, it
And
did.
then you started,
And then we were up like 7, 8, and
it
like
threw
crazy
off,
stuff.
And it threw off kind of people's expectations because for a long time, starting in like October of 23, that 3 cut was pretty well kind of gospel. I mean, that was kind of baked into a lot of people. And I don't try to predict rates, and I don't try to predict where bond yields are going to be. Otherwise, I wouldn't be here. I'd be on some beach right now, right? But it just shifted the way that everybody looked at the marketplace, and it took a while to kind of recalibrate that.
How much do you think the election year this year
That's
in
what I
particular
was
went into?
gonna
Because guess
ask.
what happened in March? Wasn't that like the very first presidential debate and all that stuff? I
I
think.
think when that was. It seems like such a long time.
Oh my gosh! Thank God.
goodness.
Oh my gosh! I'm just tired of all
Yeah,
of it. but
people talk about that, and there's
caused-
probably something to it. And
But can you
I wonder
quantify
how.
it? I don't know.
Not me at least, but I wonder how much of it is real, like calculated strategy, and how much of it is,
coincidence.
well, I don't want to say excuse, but it's an easy out. It's an easy like, well, let's just wait and see. And
I think people do, though.
I think there's something to it.
because
it's just
it
how
gets
much
around
of it
the beginning
is.
of October. I feel that everybody, sellers and buyers, going, I got to find out what we're going to do in November. Then I'll come back.
Which
Yeah,
is
but
crazy
even then-
because now you're still not going to know, and
Yeah.
that's
Yeah,
one of the things.
correct.
So
When
I
you're
wrote
looking at a
down-
$4,000 a month mortgage payment, I don't think you care who's president. You're
well-
just like, man.
But if you're trying to then figure out policy-wise how that is going to impact rates and costs and supply and demand and everything else, like, so I've got a chunk down here on the corner. So this is 2025, and with 2 lions and 2 stars, I've got unpredictable.
Yeah.
And so as we move into a new presidential, administration, everything else, people are trying to figure out what that's going to look like. And I still think, politics aside, I really don't care one way or the other. But I think there's just still competing ideas of what it's going to look like.
Well,
I don't think there's a clear path of what it's going to be and how it's going to look.
But
And I
if
think
you
that
need to
first
sell
quarter,
or you need to buy, just do it instead of like, let's see what's
I
going to
mean,
happen.
if it pencils for you and you're in the position to be able to make a clear cut choice, yeah. But it's
If you're trying to predict where we're going.
yeah, exactly. If you're saying that, I'm going to wait and see what happens to
Then
a presidential election because I think policy or rates are going to do something, then
We always say the best time to buy was yesterday because the rate, as we know, you'll probably tell us how much they went up in 23 and how much they went up in 24, that it's always more tomorrow.
Well, but the economy is so different. The economy in reality, which is really weird to say that because that is reality.
Main Street and Wall Street. Right?
Yeah, they're just totally different right now, right? Like you and I were talking about beforehand. We were talking about credit card debt when I first walked in here, and we have the highest credit card debt, right? But like employment is strong and all these other things. And when we looked we were the highest since 2010.
Yeah, so that's kind of the thing too, is people always say, well, credit card debts hit this all-time high. And it's like, well, what is it as a percentage of actual disposable income?
Yeah.
Right? Because if people earn more and there's just more credit limit and they're just
The dollar might be,
they
may
happen
be
to
higher,
put
but it's
more
the
on
same
credit,
percentage.
but it really doesn't
right.
matter, right?
Yeah.
But
It was
for
like
a long
11,
time,
11.5.
we've been hovering around like that 9.5, 9.8%, which is kind of historic, kind of where we are, right?
Yeah.
So there were really no red flags there. But the last quarter was like 11.4 or 5, something like that. So
Yeah.
it definitely spiked. And you had to go back to like first quarter, second quarter of 2010 to have a same kind of.
Yep.
And what's really hard about that is definitely probably hitting lower income households, moderate income households first.
And that first quarter, so we always talk about '08 for the recession, but it actually happened fourth quarter of '08, right?
Yes,
Because I
that's
can
right
remember
when I started.
I bought in August,
Yeah.
and market fell in November,
No.
right, of '08, right? So it was really, I mean, we always say '08, but it was really more 9 and 10 where it
September
was
was
really.
Lehman. So yeah. I mean, so it's just I don't know. We're in a really different spot though now compared to where we were then, and that's actually created some kind of the trickiness, right?
Yeah.
So we talk about the Fed, what they're going to do, and they're still having to kind of thread a needle, right? I mean, you want inflation to be on track at least, or at least show some kind of indication that it's a long whatever glide path that they think it is. So whether that's 2.5%, right? And we were a little higher last month. We were, you think, on the annualized rate, we were looking at like 2.7. So it's a little higher, it's a little stickier. People for the longest time have been saying that last mile is going to be the most challenging, and so far I think it's proved to be the case. The Fed
To get it balanced, you mean?
to get back to that 2, right at 2%, right?
Yeah, and
Now
I
you're
remember
squeezing that last bit of the orange out, you know what I mean?
right
So it's-
when I read about it a couple of months ago. I think prior to the September the rate cut or the Fed making the cut. It's like this is like trying to stop a semi on a dime. Like you have to start slowing down way in advance to hit this window,
Right.
and it's very, very difficult.
It's hard to do.
And then you also have unemployment coming into play and all these other things. And I talk to people and they're like, unemployment's high, and I'm like, look at the data. Like it's like historic lows actually. Like it just
People
really
listen
is.
to the media.
Well,
because
so-
the media always is saying
So, but
stuff
that's
like,
the weird
where are
part.
you getting that
So
from?
I don't really have insanely out of the norm credit card debt. I have very low unemployment, and we're still in this situation. So it's like, it's just very hard to quantify or predict. To your
The
point,
crazy thing too is we were coming from a period that was super not normal. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And so you did have this rise in the unemployment rate when you were coming from the unemployment rate being at 3.5, and now you're at 4.2.
and during
4.3.
COVID, where like businesses literally had to shut doors, right, because
It's a
of
whole
COVID
different
restrictions
thing.
and
Yeah,
everything.
Yeah.
Right?
And so now it's trying to figure out kind of where we are in whatever part of the economic, track that we're on right now.
I
So,
think that COVID did just like it came in and just stirred the pot really, really, really
in
bad.
a lot of weird ways.
And then 21 and 22 was just really weird. And then I think we're just kind of slowing down and getting
Our footing
normalized.
again, yeah.
Just where is that normal? What is that normal? Because we haven't been in a normal for a long time. But
Right.
I said it last week. It's like whatever is happening right now is your normal. So just
That's exactly right.
make it work.
in the time that we always look back to 2018, 2019 as just kind of the reference,
of what it was,
of what it was, and we call it normal, but it was normal for then. We don't know where we're at right now. If it's
2019
normal or
was.
not, right?
We talked about it last week. 2019 was still elevated. When you prior to like
2018
2020,
and 2019 were great years
Yeah.
for real
Right.
estate. They
Yeah.
were all-time highs.
they were, and then in 2020 it was just this. They're 20 to 20. I tend to think it was
We
from
started
2020
off
to
20 on a
22.
tear,
Yeah,
and then March.
exactly right. It's like March 19th or something like that. But that's the anomaly, in 2018, 2019 was like just really, really strong years, I can remember we talked about it, people thought values were overinflated in 2019, like I don't know what to tell you.
Yeah.
I'd kill to go back and buy in 2019,
Right. Yeah. Or 21. Like it was just skyrocketed.
Really
So-
hard to get your head around it.
But
yeah.
the hard part right now is like what do I tell a buyer? What do I tell a seller, right? You know, with
Based on stats and facts,
Right,
and
but-
not the feel.
But the stats, if I look at it, you know, I still have an inventory problem, right? Which would create a seller's market. But when we were talking about average day, you know, usually we say a balanced market is 6 months of inventory, right? And we're probably at like 3, is my guess. Or
2-2.
2. Oh my gosh, even worse.
Yeah.
And we are absolutely in a buyer's market right now.
So I would say you're probably right, depending upon the market.
The house.
And so I talk about the market,
Okay.
but there's really dozens of markets within our market.
Yeah,
and you
agreed.
guys are talking.
Yes.
It can be
very specific
neighborhood
ones.
specific.
Exactly,
Yeah.
and it does matter though.
Yes, it
like
does.
I'm talking generally the market, and you guys are talking for this buyer, this seller, this client. Here's their market. And I always say, like, you all do a really good job of defining the market for the client.
Yeah.
And all these stats and stuff are super nice to have, and they provide kind of the backdrop and the context. But, you know, I had someone once say, I think it was when I very first started, so this must have been 2018. And so I knew, like, stats and the numbers and the economics and stuff, but the industry, I was still learning so much more, and still am. But but super fresh into it. And someone once said to me, they're like, look, Brad, like every one of those transactions is an individual story.
Yeah.
And they are. So, you know, so the broader trends matter. They tell you something, but you getting down and really defining the market for your clients is the service and the value,
So that's
the expertise
exactly
that you all bring
with
to-
sellers. It's always funny with that one story because you can sit there and talk to them about everything, and here's all the houses that have sold around you in the past 6 months, and they'll go, but they were going through a divorce, that's why that's low, but that was an estate sale or this, and then that is the story.
Yeah.
So when that comes to an appraiser coming in, I'm like, this is the story. They don't care, but there are reasons why these houses that were distressed bring you down. But it's good to know. But now we have to go out to the broader market and go, well, let's look at a 4-bedroom,
Yeah.
2.5 bath of your square footage, you know, next door neighbors or neighborhoods.
Even the buyer
so weird.
is a story, right? Like I have
yeah.
one, and the house just happens to be in the neighborhood where the daughter lives.
Yes.
You know,
right,
like,
yeah.
Yes,
like,
or the
like
father needs to be
unbeknownst-
There's no way to
Yes.
price that into the marketplace.
Yeah, because
And it
it's-
sells immediately because thank God it finally hit.
or like I did a listing appointment that we're going to list, and you know, it's Westfield, and it's like, all right, so in this price point, we we're kind of talking about, I got 45 on the market, right? And I've had 15 price drops on those 43. But what I don't have is any houses on the market in this neighborhood. They historically don't come on the market. When they do, they sell
Right,
rapidly.
right.
Like that's a
Very different
It's,
thing.
it's different,
And that's
right?
where you
But
all
then how
have
do you
The
figure it
perfect
out?
marriage of like the science and then the art.
Yeah.
Well, I
I
had
mean,
one
that's-
that we did put on the market, and I was like, oh, this is going to take a year or two. I'm like, I
It's
don't
because
know.
that's what you said, and it, you know.
I was. It had a skate.
I need to start
It
saying
had
all
a
of my
hockey
images.
rink in the basement.
That's amazing.
Literally a hockey rink in the
is pretty
basement. It sold in like 2 days to a hockey family.
And
That's-
then
So
in the
that's
summer,
the
it's a
story
waiting
of-
pool.
Yeah, right.
Like,
No, it's
that's a dad
inside.
joke.
So yeah, the story is huge on the
Yeah.
data. So how do we extrapolate all those weirdos?
But the data gets you
can't.
to a starting point.
Correct.
It gets you to the ballpark, and
It's
then
still
you're
part of the
trying to
average,
figure out
yeah.
your seat within the ballpark.
Yeah.
Right?
It is
Yeah.
much easier for me to make determinations and understand what's going on every house. Like, you know, we have a bunch of houses on the market. I could tell you why each one is sitting, right?
Right.
And then you roll it into the broader market feel, you know, that number becomes bigger than what it should be, right? What I can't do right now is tell you what the broader market, I can tell you what it is doing. I can't tell you what it's going to do. I have a feel.
That's why we
I have a
have
feel
Brad.
for it. But he's just saying he doesn't know.
So
He's got an idea and a
I
trend.
got ideas.
And
yeah,
same
yeah,
with me.
Yeah. There's a working theory.
So what's your working theory?
Yeah, let's go, Brad.
Let's do this.
So let's just go through.
Do I
so
bet
let's
on
just go
black
through
or
what I
red?
did.
What am I doing?
You hedge your bets.
Okay.
So we thought 24 was going to be up 10%.
Where were we at?
And we thought prices were going to be up around 2%. So what we ended up with, where we are year to date, is we're basically flat on sales. We're technically down 0.6%
On sales.
on sales, and this is for single family homes. So,
So this is
kind of exclude
transactions
this.
were down.
Transactions,
Okay.
closed sales were down. If we look at, you know, we incorporate the month we're in now, extrapolate what we should hit, we're basically flat. So call it somewhere plus or minus 1% for the year.
So can I ask a question about that though?
Yeah.
Where was that in comparison to 23? Where was that in comparison to 20?
That's no, so that yeah.
So
That is comparison to 23.
in comparison to 23.
Yeah.
Where is that in comparison to like 19?
So,
right, because
yeah.
inventory started dropping
Inventory
like a rock
plummeted
in 2020.
in 20
right?
and 21.
Right, because
yeah.
everybody's rates went down.
So we're on track to have about 29 to 30,000, about 29,000 closed sales in the BLC territory, right?
In 24.
For single family, in 24. So 2018 and 2019 would about 33,000.
Okay. So, but over the past 4 years, it's probably pretty on par, though, don't you think?
No, because 21 was an extraordinary year. The first half of 22 was really good. Back half of 20 was really good.
Yeah.
You remember 20, we basically didn't get that spring bump, and it just bumped it to the fall. And fall
Yes,
was
I
on
remember
fire.
that for
So,
sure.
super weird years, and I don't know how you really kind of calibrate those into, you know. So
I don't know if you can. But the hard part is nobody can forget them either.
No. It's pretty indelible.
Yeah. It's
And
weird.
so the other thing, too, is we looked at pending sales. Pending sales last month really jumped off. The first cut we took, because we close out the data on the 5th day of the next month.
Okay.
So December 5th, we closed out for November. There's always stuff that kind of trickles in after that. But if we waited, it would take forever to get the reports out, right? So it looks like we're really going to be about 15 to 16% up in pending sales, which is still really good. But remember where we
in
were
November.
From
Yeah,
November of 23?
23. But remember what happened last year in November of 20. So if you go back,
I don't.
like,
I don't
Yeah,
remember.
please
what
tell
I
me.
did 2 days
Please
ago.
tell
do
me.
you remember where we were?
No, please tell me.
That's probably a good thing. No, I'm just kidding.
Yeah. Sitting at this table together. I don't know.
Late September, October rates really went up to like 7.5%, and so pendings just fell off
Yeah.
in November.
And it's
So-
becoming the holidays as well.
Well, but it's year
so-
over year, so it's still holidays, right?
Yeah.
But the big thing was rates really went up fast too. So they were considerably higher. Year to date, though, pending sales are up about 1% from where we were last year.
Interesting.
So
pending
we are
sales have
going
actually
up.
done. They've actually performed okay. They performed a little bit better.
Where are we at on inventory?
Inventory. So we don't do that on the annual because
Okay,
it's a snapshot, so it's a year over year. But we've had 15 consecutive months of year over year inventory growth. Now remember, we are digging out of a tremendous
Really
hole. If
bad
you think
one.
about February 2022, I think, so we cover 16, 17 counties. It's a population of like 2.2 million, 2 million people. Let's just call it 2 million people. And there was 1,500 homes on the market.
Right.
I mean-
well, and the population going up too. I've always wondered if that's starting to make a correlation to more houses buying and selling, because just the population going up.
Yeah.
But you just said 15 months in a row we were
Had
going
year
up.
over year growth.
We're going, but
Yeah.
Had
but it's a
year-over-year
small
growth.
amount of growth. But it's going to be that way. You know,
It's
you're not
better
going to
than the
see
It's like
other
a 6
direction.
and 7%, 10%. But even if you look at a 10% growth, I mean, it's not. It sounds giant. but
of 100.
compared-
So if I look at like Fishers and it's
compared to where
100.
we were, though, too. Like,
Yeah. I mean,
So we're sitting at like 4,800 homes. Let's call it 5,000 homes active at the end of November. It's not crazy to look back at 2018 and 2019 and have 6,000 homes on the market at this time. You know what I mean? There's still.
But we do want to see this stats get better. And
Yeah,
you're
so
saying
that
positive,
totally is a positive.
You're saying
Totally is a
positive
positive.
things. Yeah.
good.
Yes.
It's good
Yeah.
for our market.
Yeah. One of the things that the higher interest rates actually did, though, and this was one of the things we were concerned about in, at the end of 23, we knew higher interest rates were going to allow the inventory to grow. People talk about the rate lock as being this thing where nobody moves or does anything. It just slows things, it just slows things down, right? I
Because
mean,
life happens.
the inventory growth has continued for almost 2 years now, right? It's a year and a half of inventory growth. So people do put their house on the market.
Well-
Which is why he's saying, and I feel too, that it's a buyer's market, because all of my buyers have slowed way down to take their time to wait for the next one, because they do see the inventory's better. They'll wait
it's giving
now.
consumers more choices. It's
Yeah.
still fairly tight in terms of the broader marketplace. There may be pockets where it's
I was
not
gonna
quite
say,
so tight.
Yeah, so pockets of where we're talking
But,
about that we see.
400 to 500 in Fishers. Yeah, there's a
Right.
lot. But it's interesting, like when you when you talk about it like that, because for a couple of years, like my whole belief structure was in 2020 and 2021, we ate up a 10-year cycle of people who moved out of convenience instead of necessity.
And rates of 2.9.
Like, because they
There's
just
a bit of both
felt
of that,
with it.
right? And because there was also people where it was time to ditch the roommate,
Yeah,
get out
there
of
was
parents'
that.
basement. I mean, there was a lot
Well,
more
it made 'em-
household growth and formation during.
But
that.
I
When
saw
everybody
a
saw
lot.
2.9, they're like,
Yeah.
time to buy.
There was also. There
I
was
mean, you could
also-
buy $1 million house and your mortgage payment was like 3 G's. You
So,
know?
the other thing too is there was a generation, like the older millennials, younger Gen X.
Oh shit! Don't get us in trouble.
I know,
again
we're
with
in
this.
the-
We
we're
already
in the
got in
boat.
trouble
We're in the
with
same boat.
Noblesville trying to have
No,
this
no, no, no,
stupid
no, no.
conversation. We're
So-
like, that's not what we said, people.
But there was
Read
a
my
large,
lips. No, I'm sorry.
There was a large group of people that had bought and had sat in a
20
house
years.
and had sat for 10 years at least.
Yeah,
You know what I
yeah,
mean? And over that 10-year period, their cost to live in terms of housing had stayed pretty low, had stayed pretty stable. Incomes over that same time had steadily kind of grown. Young people become middle-aged people and have kids, right? And so
I
it's
saw
kind of everything kind of all coming together at the
it
exact
did, but
same
I saw a
time.
lot of like people move because rates were
They
low.
didn't want to
They
miss
wanted-
out.
and then move 2 years later again.
Because they didn't like what they bought over
Yeah.
like a literally a 5-minute walkthrough and write it on the
And
car's
so
hood.
this is just my working theory. Like every year, 10% of the market is just that kind of moving, right? Because I want to, instead of like I had another kid, or I'm
Right.
downsizing, or reload, or whatever it is,
Yeah.
divorce, death, blah blah blah. You know, all the things that come into it. School systems, who cares? I feel like we lost it. I don't know, 5-6 years of it, like whatever it is, because those people moved earlier, and so, you know, it's like, is this just normal of the people who move because of necessity and all these other things in
Yeah.
life and everything, and like this is what the market looks like with that additional 10%. Like I don't know, that's my thought on it, because we lost like everybody did it, and then the people who had to move because of necessity almost couldn't because they weren't in as strong of a financial position as the people who moved for convenience.
Or they also
Interesting.
couldn't find anything, so that was a scare.
Yeah.
That
Yeah.
they couldn't find.
Yeah, the inventory got super
So-
super low. But the other thing too is, and I think the forecast we have for 25 either. So instead of throwing out kind of the dart that I did last time, like I always create a range.
Just do a
and
net.
The last time I threw out a dart, I'm like, no, but it's fine. I don't care. But there is an optimistic side to it too. And one of the things that I think makes the optimistic side of it feel okay is that the region has had really pretty good economic tailwinds.
Mhm.
We've had pretty good economic growth. We've had, the earnings have grown pretty well comparative to the rest of the Midwest.
Cost of
And
living,
migration has been strong.
Yeah.
I mean,
even though people
net
think it's
migration,
more
net domestic
expensive here,
migration,
it is still
it's relative to wherever
I mean,
they're
we
coming
get
from.
a ton
I mean,
of relocation
there's still a
on
lot of people
purpose.
coming in.
Yes,
Yes.
just to move to Indiana or
Yeah.
certain towns, just because they heard it was this or that, and they didn't have to, they didn't want to, but they're like, I'm out of here.
Yep.
I'm out of where I'm at. I don't want to be here
Mm-hmm.
anymore.
So while there may be some that were pulled forward kind of on like a quicker timeline that we did,
Mm-hmm.
but there's still more people coming in. So I think there's a reasonable case to still expect that growth to kind of
Yeah.
help with demand.
You guys don't have the access to the stats of where buyers are coming from, how many came from out of state and purchased like
Man,
year
I
over
would
year.
love that.
That would be a
be
nice
hard.
one because
That
it would
we
be interesting.
Look
to
at
see.
migration trends, but they're always lagged. They're super lagged.
Yeah, it'd be interesting to
Yeah.
see because
It'd be hard to
especially in
even
20 and
quantify it.
21, they were leaving other states like crazy for many reasons.
Yeah.
And then now they just, it's amazing. I mean, I get people from Texas all the time and California all the time because they just want to get out of there,
Mhm.
whatever it is, weather, whatever.
So
Come to Indiana.
So where do you think we end up, right?
Yeah.
So I mean, I do think the spring market is always just in general competitive here. It just is,
It's probably
It's
so-
more around school systems and stuff, like
Yeah. So in the pockets that you're probably talking about, I would I would tend to agree, right?
That's very fair. So more metro suburbs. The more rural you get, the less I believe that is a thing.
Yeah, and so if we're talking about the market as a whole, right? So if we're just going to step back and just take the the big view of this. So in November at the NAR at the annual, their economist he forecasted nationally, I think, plus 10% sales, 25 over 24,
Okay.
and he was looking at 2% growth in prices.
Okay.
So if you look at the range of where I think we could be, and this I think largely depends on what happens with the interest rates. I think if we have stickiness that keeps the rates higher above 6.5 through the spring, I think the conservative approach looks a little bit more likely.
Yeah.
If we do start to see around 6.25, 6.10, 6 somewhere around that, I think the optimistic view comes into play, because then you're hitting that spring selling throughout the whole region
Even
hard.
5.9, they're going to jump like crazy. Just seeing that 5.
But Feeney predicted down
Yeah.
to like 6.2.
By
That's
the
where
end of
they
the
thought.
year.
Yeah.
By the end of the year.
And he
low
also said,
6.
though, he could see it hitting 5.9.
Yeah.
He said he could.
So if
That's where I want
If we're
it. I
conservative-
want us there for a decade, but I think that's wishful thinking right now.
if we're get that stickiness conservative, I think +4.
Mm-hmm.
Just because I think we'll still hit the summer. I think the fall, there's more to make up on a year-over-year basis,
Mm-hmm.
kind of that back half. If the rates do cooperate and we get down to like that 6.25, or around that at least earlier in it, then I think there's potential for 10-12% growth year over year, which wouldn't be out of the norm. Like we're still kind of working from a lower base.
Mm-hmm.
So if you split those two, if you say conservative is 4, optimistic with the economic tailwinds, the rates coming into play, a lot of things aligning, employment not breaking, you know what I mean? The economy's still doing really
Yeah.
well. Somewhere between 4 and 12 is 8, right? So that's kind of if I were going to throw a dart, that's where I'm at. But conservatively, you could be 4.
So, what do you think if none of that stuff works out?
Well, then
It's impossible.
it depends why,
Flat again?
right? It depends
Yep.
why.
Yeah.
Depends what's going on, what causes none of that to happen.
Well, that's
Yeah.
the hard thing when people say, "What do you expect to happen
Yeah.
next year?" Is
Right.
we just never know what's going to happen.
Right.
Nobody predicted a
Global
2020.
pandemic.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So nobody
One-
predicted
one on my
that. So
to-do list.
we have to throw that away.
Yep.
It's over, and look at all that and see how we're starting to stabilize. I mean, do you feel we're stabilizing?
In terms of the housing market, or in terms of the economy?
The housing market, since we're talking
I
about
think the
housing.
I
housing
wanna do
market
both.
may actually. I think I'm a little bit more optimistic about 25. I think all things being equal and all things staying steady where they're at, I'm a little bit more optimistic for 25 for sure.
The reason I am is for what I just said, is that's behind us. 23 was a little close. 24 was a little close.
Mhm.
But I think people are just ready to move on and just pay attention to what's happening today. And they know it's not going to go back. I think some people may have in 2023 waited for it to come back to
Oh, yeah.
2.9
Yeah.
or anything like that. Or they're waiting for the
Before, yeah.
prices to start to drop, because that was also in the media that housing prices are coming down. They're not coming down. So
Well,
it's kind of like 25 just saying,
Peg that for a second.
yeah,
Go
but
ahead.
2025 is just going to be like, we've had 23, 24, and now 25 to just, okay, let's just look at this and just go forward.
I think expectations are starting to align a little bit
Yes,
better. I think
yes,
there's a
absolutely.
little bit more clear on kind of what expectations
And
might
they're
be
not
moving
waiting.
forward.
Because like in 23 and 24, I think they're just kind of waiting. Wait a minute. What, they're just waiting.
So, let's talk about price.
Yeah.
Let's talk about price. We've been very transparent about this. I feel we have. Maybe we haven't been. So, Shelly will be like, "Hey, we're at 98% list to sale ratio," but that's not original list. That's the list price of when it got
Finally
under
sold.
contract.
Right.
And I don't think there's a way to quantify that in our data points right now. I would have to go into every house and see how many price drops you've done. I'd like to know what's the average amount of price drops. Is it 1? Is it 2? Is
On
it
a per house basis, it's a little
Because it's not-
trickier. You
it's
do
not
have to-
available to
you-
us.
You do have to dig market wide.
I mean, we could, but we'd have to put a team of monkeys
You
on
can
it.
look through the market insights tool and you can see the sale price from the original price You can see the number of price changes. You can see the percentage of the price change.
Yeah.
So that gives you some kind of indication. But if you're going house by house, then yeah, I mean, you're gonna.
But when you're talking
a little
about
bit.
the numbers, though, do you run it off of the original list price?
We usually do it off of the most previous.
Right. So that
Yeah.
is a
Because it's a more current. And I get your point. I think they both make sense, but the reason why we do it off the most current is because it's the most accurate reflection of what the pricing was at that time.
correct. Well, and
Right.
how do you quantify that somebody's like everybody will get a seller who's like you're like, hey, let's list it at 380, and they're like 420 and not a penny less. And you're like, well, whatever, dude. Like, I mean, I don't want you. I mean, I'm not.
Sure.
99% of agents don't do that, but at the same
So-
time, like sometimes you're like, all right, there's always a seller who'd be like, let's push it 5 and see what happens.
Oh,
right?
yeah.
And it just falls on its face, right?
Yeah.
And then you take a bigger hit. It is what it is, but yeah, you can't really quantify it, but it's a thing. I mean, I'm out there every day. You're
So
out
I
there
have a
every day.
question for you. So I was just making me think, because you've said this many times, but so if I'm saying it's 98% list to sale ratio on the sold prices,
Yeah.
what do you think it really was on that original list price? 96? Are you
That's
saying?
what I'm saying.
Yeah.
Is it 96? Is it 94? Is it is it like only like a couple percentage points off? When we had Josh on last week, he's just kind of he's like us. He's just like, this is what I see, and like he thinks it's like a 10 to 15% reduction in prices next year. For me, I was like, that's a big number. Like 15% is a really
That
large
would
number.
be a problem in the economy. I would think something
Correct.
drastically
Well, but
happened.
that's what he was saying.
Yeah,
he's
I
like,
know.
he's
But I
like,
think
see
even
it's going-
10 is a
Yeah.
10's a big
if you're
number,
talking
man.
about specific markets,
Like a $400,000 house, man. That's 40 G's.
right?
That's a big number.
But are you looking? Yeah. So what? And it depends how you categorize what you're saying, right? So if you're
Yeah.
saying on a specific house coming down 10% from where it started, that's one thing. If you're talking about the market as a whole, having the median sale price go down by 10% on a year-over-year basis,
That won't happen.
that's a whole different ballgame.
That would
That's a
scare
whole
everybody,
different-
I
that's-
think.
I just don't see that happening
Yeah,
because
no way.
good houses still perform.
Well,
like
and
we
good
have known
economies
that.
still perform.
Good economy still perform. Yeah.
I mean, that's one of the things that probably the beginning of maybe the second quarter of this year. Once we got to June, you could start seeing at June there's a pathway in which the Fed starts to cut rates.
Mm-hmm.
You started to see a little softness show up, and then it was kind of bouncy, right? But if you think about this, the Fed has two things that they're looking at, two mandates, right? One is stable prices, one is stable employment, full employment. Once inflation started to look like it was at least coming along some sort of a predictable glide path that they thought would be where it should be, whether or not it's a whole different thing, doesn't matter. Employment became where they were looking, right? And so one of the things I showed you, I've got like 28 things I look at every week. Right?
Yeah.
Because there's
Yeah.
no
There's
one
a lot.
indicator, but there's a lot of indicators you look at that tell you the story, right?
So-
And unemployment insurance claims are one of the things that you can look to. Do they go up? Do they go down? And for the longest time, they've kind of been steady. There's been a few months where you see a spike and then it goes back to trend line. This last month we had a spike, and whether it goes back to trend line or not, we'll have to wait and see, right? Then there's the continued claims, the people that stay on the unemployment insurance and keeping those, and those did have a little bit of a bump, but they've had some bumps in the past and they've come back down to trend line. So keeping an eye on the consumer, because that's also that's who you interact with, that's who you work with, is consumers. Are they employed, and are they in a spot where they feel comfortable spending?
So you just said you look at 28 points every week.
Something like that, yeah. There's a
What
ton.
is
It's a lot of tabs.
What?
It's a
I'm
lot of
just
stuff.
curious
Yeah.
because you're doing this 52 weeks of a year
Yeah.
for Mibor.
Uh-huh.
When you get that information over and over and over again, are you just providing that to make the market insights, or are you actually getting out and telling people what you see? Oh no, we're coming into this or that. When you start to see a weirdness,
I do a bit of both. So when I
Yeah.
go out to, when I go out to teams or brokerages, or I go out to the economic development folks or the chambers, I try to do a mix of here's what's going on with the market, then here's kind of the general trends within the economy, here's what we're seeing, here's why this is changing. Here's why we're keeping an eye on this. And a lot of it, for the most part this year, has been kind of in the wait and see mode. Even when you look at the jobs numbers, because like every month we get what's called JOLTS, is the job openings, the turnovers, the layoffs, quits and stuff like that. And for the most part, it looks like employers are also kind of in that wait and see mode. Like, we're not going to be doing a ton of hiring, but also we don't want to let go of people. Like, I think a lot of people are still in that scar of 08, 09, 10, of all of a sudden the economy recovers and people left the workforce. And now you're really trying to find talent. And you could see this kind of play out where it's like, we would rather try to hold on and keep our team here and intact than try to let people go and then have to come back and rehire a bunch of people.
Which is what Jensen
Which will cost more too.
And
it is. It's costly.
Jensen's doing the Make My Move for that very reason.
Yeah, he is. So it's really just, how much of it is just a fear that is out there with like really no indication other than like a feel that creates this fear. And then
I think there's anxiety too, because we've been in a bit of this kind of wait and see mode for a while.
Yeah.
And if you look at and there's always the anecdotes and stories, and we've talked about this before. The anecdotes are what they are, stories are what they are. You get enough of them, it tells you something. There's a fire truck. That was weird. But enough of them begin to tell you a little bit of something. Like there's always some truth in it. And so I think people see this weird streak that we've been on where it's not felt good, but the numbers kind of say it's good, and so there's a real disconnect between how people feel just because of, I think there's a general kind of anxiety.
But that gets back to what we've been saying, though. You say the numbers show is good, people don't feel it is good, is because people, this is what I'm saying.
So people don't trust data all of a sudden.
Well, they also don't, they can't get past the 21 and 22 things. That's why I said by 2025, hopefully they'll stop listening to my neighbor sold to her house in 2 days. That is no longer the problem, but they're still hearing what they've heard is still in the brain.
Yeah.
That happened 2 years ago. You need to start paying attention. We have changed.
That was the outlier. That's just all it is. It was the
in
outlier.
Today's market, yes.
But we live in a society where like that's not fair. You caught the break.
Yeah.
You did something and
That's
I
very
didn't
true.
get to, and like that's
When you do
not
miss
fair.
out, it sucks.
It does. We missed out.
It
We
sucks to
stayed
miss
where we
out.
are. I mean, I have a low interest rate, but like, I could have gone and bought something different. But my, at the time, 9-year-old daughter ran our lives, and she said no, so we didn't move.
At the time.
Yeah, well, she still does. She's just not 9. That's the only thing that changed.
Yeah.
But it whatever. So, I would have loved to buy a lake house in Sweetwater in 2018.
That
but it was
went
like
crazy.
It was like 325 G's. Yeah,
They're settling down, though. I will say, talking about prices stabilizing and or coming back down, I would say is in Sweetwater and Cordery specifically, because it's really slowed down on the amount of sales.
$900,000 for like a 1,500 square foot house, man. It's like 3 bedrooms.
But
You're
it
like,
was
what
the
are we doing?
staycation thing
It
when
was.
people couldn't do anything or they wouldn't, couldn't work. So let's go find a house to live in.
And it was new.
Well,
Yeah.
It's a new experience.
right, but it just has become, and
After
that
4
is
years,
one
it's not a new
area.
experience.
Right. Well, and it costs a lot of money to run those houses because of just everything. But now I do see the sales are much lower. The amount of houses hitting the market are much lower, probably because of the interest rate they got in 21 and 2022 to buy that house. And people are just like, I think, on hold in that specific market to go, these have to come down because it was a massive spike in price.
Yeah.
That they're waiting for those to
In some
stabilize.
ways, too, I think they've also set a new kind of reality, though, too. It's like, how far can you come down from that? If there's no real...
Yeah, it
Yeah.
won't.
If
It
there's
won't
no
dive
detriment,
back.
what's
It won't
the-
dive
yeah,
back
what's
down.
the-
But
People
people
just stay
are
there.
just kind of
Nobody's
watching.
going to go lose 200 G's,
If they don't have to.
Yeah, if they don't. We'll just
yeah.
hold on to it. We'll give it to the kids, whatever it may be.
Yeah.
But I don't know. It's just all really kind of interesting to me, and I kind of wish right now, and this goes back to kind of what I was just saying. Honestly, it's a buyer's market, from what I'm experiencing for the most part, except it shouldn't be because the inventory and the days on market is
Especially because
indicative
you're
of a
saying
seller's market.
2.2
Months, right?
That's not a buyer's market, but they
In the
sure
metro area, there's probably
Yeah.
pockets where it probably is a little higher though.
And
I mean,
that's why
the
we
thing.
do
It's-
we don't
yeah.
do the 17 counties because
Yeah.
it
Right,
is
right. It
too
doesn't-
broad,
Yeah.
and that gets
It's a
down
backdrop though to help you. Like if you're looking at a pocket that's really like 4.2, 4.3, the 2.2 for the metro area gives you a backdrop of, well, there's more inventory here, so we need
Yeah.
to rethink what we're
There
doing.
is.
Or,
Yeah.
But
it
what
informs your
happens though is,
strategy.
I see the waste. It's fair. I understand how humans work. Sellers exploited their leverage, right, for a couple of years, and I get it. Like how
because
about
they
it?
could.
They
Well,
could.
they had the inventory.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And now buyers are flexing back in a just as ridiculous, I don't want to say ridiculous because it's not really that, in just as strong of a manner.
I will see, you see a little bit of that play out too with the data of, you can see when, and we talked about this too, where, for a deal to close, expectations on both sides have to be met, right? And certainly for the first half of 24, and then when the interest rates really went up in the middle of the year, like you could see it took time for the expectations to realign, right? Sellers had the inventory was still very low.
No
They
inspection
controlled it.
items. Nope.
They really controlled it, but as prices continued to go up and the interest rates went up, buyers all of a sudden just expected more for the money, I think. They
Correct.
just expected more things. And then there's this thing where, for 2.5 years, you didn't really have to negotiate much in terms of the deal.
Yeah.
And now all of a sudden you're back to kind of what we were doing before, where you had
Well,
to negotiate through a deal.
I'm
And
up to 4 counters sometimes
art.
on that,
Yeah.
and I didn't
And
see
it
a
is.
counter for 3 years.
there's no science and there's no easy answer on how you do it, but the more you do it, the better that you get at it. And that's just the
It's just
the
I've seen
reality
more
of it.
buyers upset when they're already getting like off list price, and I just think it's people are scarred. They missed houses. Or
It's an emotional thing buying a house too.
It is. It
It's
super
hard.
is.
Yeah.
It is.
I'll
Which
get
is
why
people.
Yeah.
I like
People get like 20 G's off a house, 15 G's off a house, right? And then they'll be like, "What do you mean the pool table doesn't stay?" And I'm like, "Oh, I'm sorry."
So I think you're
What?
talking. The mentality of all of that is exactly what you both just were kind of saying. Is the sellers are still pushing for that 21, 22 market where they can do whatever they want. The buyer can't ask for it, and they want over list. And then the buyer's like, I went over list in today's market. I went over list, and you won't do one thing on my inspection item.
Yeah.
I want a mutual release because I asked for these things, and they are a lot. And
Or-
I'm leaving. And before, they couldn't leave. There was
They
not
can
another
now.
house to pick,
And they
but they
can.
can now. And I think the stat I just heard at the economic development meeting with Mibor is the amount of houses back on the market is just really starting to go up.
Well, I tend to see, like, let's say, just a simple one. I'll just make it up. Like, let's say 10,000 under list price, right? Is where it ends up being at, and so the seller feels like they made a big concession, and then the buyer is kind of like, "Hey, fix the GFCIs and the freaking bathroom fan that's not vented," and the seller's like, "Yo, like we came off 10 G's," you know what I mean? And the buyer's like, yeah, and you're gonna do this, and I'm like, and like it's just there's been it's never conveyed in it, but like I'm on the receiving end of conversations, right, both ways, and it's just very interesting how dug in people are getting, and I'm just it is fine. It's my job, I'm like, all right, hey, let's pick our heels up a little bit, like let's humanize this. I have a fiduciary responsibility to my buyer.
But you're a good agent, I will say, because it is very difficult on the other side sometimes because they also dig in. Because
They do.
they want to prove their
That's what I mean. Yeah.
They want to prove themselves to their client that they're the one in control or whatever. Just you have a buyer that wants to buy and a seller wants to sell, so try to work through it instead of digging
And thread
in.
the needle. How do we do this?
Yeah.
It's still going to take a little bit more time, I think, for just we are
People
still,
to forget.
Well, I mean,
Yeah,
we are
people
still
to, yeah,
coming
kind
out
of, I
of,
guess, but
still coming out of a really weird time. I mean,
Yeah.
it's going to take some time to kind of normalize expectations. Still, I think it's getting a little bit better.
I
think
do.
I do too.
I think also the shock of the rates is beginning to wear off a little bit.
I think by end of spring we're in a good spot because like what do you want to call it? September-ish is when buyers started to really pick up leverage.
Yeah.
Just really, really pick up leverage. And I mean, it's just gotten worse. I don't mean worse, but
Better for the buyers.
Better for the buyers. Like they've picked up more and more leverage, especially I would say end of October. Houses really started to sit a little bit longer. And I think by the time, we're in a cold months, we do tend to be a little bit lower, blah, blah, blah. I do think once there's more competition with buying in the spring, people will start to normalize again, right? And I think this is, to your point of like, it's just unpredictable. This is an odd pocket in a broader scheme of a year, and this pocket was just unpredictable to a certain extent.
Yeah.
But I also don't think this is a massive long-term trend either. I think we finally find our middle ground.
I think we might be coming out of it,
Yeah.
and that's why I'm a little bit more optimistic. If we can continue on a path to where the rates allow us to be in a little bit more active kind of time of the year, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
If we can hit that springtime, I think it resets a little bit.
I just know we're getting on a timeline here. Okay. I want to make sure that you have hit what you really wanted to hit on some other items.
Yeah, the only other thing that's been really interesting to watch is I think as prices have continued to go up, and the rates haven't really settled back down just yet, but one of the other things, and the inventory being just kind of low still, is I'd be curious to hear if you have this too, or if you've seen this, but you're starting to see other areas of the region pick up activity that have been kind of quiet for a long time. Like you're starting to see prices pick up in Montgomery County. You're starting to see activity in Jennings and Jackson County. You're starting to see Decatur County start to pick up a little bit more life than they have in a long time.
Because people need to go out farther to find a house in their price point.
Yeah.
I do a lot. I do Kokomo stuff. We do, Sheridan, all these areas. I do a lot in Greenfield. I do a lot in Johnson County. I wouldn't call it
Greenfield.
Yeah. I do a lot in Morgan County. I'm from Morgan County. We do stuff over in Hendricks quite a bit. And I would say that those areas have had a very sustained boom because of price point. And then the more people move there, the more it is helping the economies and all this other stuff. And so 100% yes. But the interesting piece about it is when all of that first started, I saw a decline in the Indy metro area. And I've seen that rebound where Indy, like inside the loop is generally what I call it. Inside the loop. And that's also kind of some COVID weird shit.
There was a couple months where it was kind of
like people are in the city, we got to run from the city type stuff. Right?
A lot of people wanted out of the city for many reasons.
Right.
But a lot of people wanted way out for many reasons because they can work from home. They wanted land. They just didn't want to be in the hustle and the bustle.
But I see it. It's stabilized.
Yeah.
I see a lot of not even baby, like empty nesters moving into the city. Because they've lived in the suburbs for so long. Like, you know what? Hey, I want something that's kind of low maintenance and a condo, and we can go enjoy the city, blah, blah, blah. Yep. And so I have seen the city stabilize from a really big knee-jerk reaction at one point that market kind of experienced. And so that's kind of been kind of cool.
It would be interesting to do that stat, 2021 to 20, and year after year, watch Marion County go up and down, and how it did go down and how it did come back up.
I think some of their HOAs on some of their buildings are ridiculous.
That's
a different conversation.
How can you sell it when it's $500 a month? I mean,
girl,
they do.
You don't even want to know some of the ones I dealt with where I'm like I couldn't sell literally just because the price point's amazing and the HOA was just
the HOA kills
teeth.
it. Yeah, kills
basically
it.
A third of it.
And then you don't know if it's going to be $600 next year. I mean, it's really, I don't know how they do it.
Yeah, and it was like, hey, do we have anything going on with the roof? Well, no, we'll check next year. Wow, they're great. Yeah, sweet. That helps
so I
us
think
so much.
if we're looking at the optimistic pathway here, I do think if things kind of stay on the track that they're on now, the economy has seemed pretty resilient. Employment stays okay, spending stays okay. You still see GDP growth. You still, I think the big wild card, and I don't know if anybody knows how to really put their head around this, but if there are trade tariff issues, how that works out, how long it lasts, where it hits in the economy, I think there's just a lot of unknowns that I think a lot of people are still trying to get their head around. But all things being said, like if we continue on this path, I think the back half of 24 does kind of mark a little bit of a turning point in terms of just expectations, a little bit more normalization.
Yeah, I feel the same exact way. Yeah.
So unless we have something kind of exogenous, something happened to the economy, something globally, or even just something weird here,
which we can't ever predict, which is what, we
don't
say what we think if we stay normal.
Right. So, but I feel quite a bit more optimistic about 25.
So talking about the stats, we talked about this, is you're saying positive things, but if we look at the stats that I have here and he has here, the last 30 days of sales, average and median, is low. The remaining inventory that's going to become those solds is high. So it kind of contradicts of where we think we might be if these days on market continue. So I'll just talk about
Yeah.
what
So,
I have.
when you're about to go through that, I kind of like, let's digest that for a second. So basically what you're saying, I'm looking at pendings and sold average days on market, right? Which means like it is in the books basically.
But those
However,
came from listings in October and or
correct.
September.
Versus what we're talking about is average days on market for actives, which is stuff that is going to be
December, January sales.
Yeah, your December, your January,
And
your
I think you
February
have to
sales.
remember where the interest rates are during those time periods too.
Right.
And a little preceding of that as well. So
They dipped down and now they've gone back up.
But these averages and medians for actives are only going to keep going higher. So when they finally sell this number, so just like Carmel, 24 hit the market in the last week, which I find is, at this point, I can't wait to see like next week. There's going to be like 2. Like who keeps putting their houses on the market right before Christmas? But
I'm putting 2 on the market this week.
I know, but
Yeah, we
it's
had
just,
to.
it's just at what
Yeah.
point do you go, oh no, it's not the right time. So pendings in Carmel, 8 of the 24, but a total of 20. So we always say this, almost wiped out what came on the market. The average days on those pendings was 24 and 10. In the past 30 days, 109 sold, and those average days on market was 32 and 12, which is higher. But if we look at the actives in Carmel, there's 131. And compared to the last 30 days at 32, the average is now 88 of what's coming down the pike. And 12 median for the past 30 days is now 51 coming down the pike. So we are seeing days on market, in my opinion. These solds are going to start to change as we go farther along, January, February, and March. In Westfield, 27 hit the market, 29 total pended, which was negative inventory. And of those, 52 on average were days on market, 22 median. And then, so that's going up compared to the past 30 days, 134 hit the market. And that was a 46 average and a 15 median days on market. I'm sorry. And then currently on the market, 214. The average day instead of 46 is 76, and the average median instead of 15 is 55. So the actives are starting to show, in my opinion, we're going to much more days on market real quick. Zionsville, 3 hit the market, 3 pended. So all of this is showing almost 2 negative inventories and 1 very close. And the 47 days, it was 43 days on the market average and 25 median. And in the 30 days, it was 24 and 14. But in the actives in that town, instead of 24 the past 30 days, it's 91. And then in 14 median, it's 55. So I don't know what to do with that information.
It's such a weird. I mean, it's holidays. There's just a lot into it. I've got one that's pending right now. We got it under contract the second week of November. Like I closed the second week of January just to skip the holidays, right? Like so. There's some weirdness now that kind of impacts numbers. It's a little bit different. I'm not going to super get into the numbers on Fishers and Noblesville just because of time, but I picked up inventory in both of them. In Fishers, I only picked up like 2, but I take that back. In Noblesville, I picked up 2. In Fishers, I picked up 12, which is a, we used to say like.
I don't think we've seen that.
Yeah, it's
really.
quite a bit. But your bigger point, so I got 188 active in Fishers. I got 160 active in Noblesville. So in Fishers, my average days on market for a pending, right? 63. Median's 30. You know, we always talk about the outliers. But if you're active, it's basically 80 and 60. 80 is the average days on market, 60 is the median. And then in Noblesville, it was, for the pendings, 45, 37. So those are actually pretty close. You know, I do like to see those numbers close. But for active days on market in Noblesville, it is basically 100 and 51. I wanted to round up to 60, but that felt like a lie. It's closer to 50. So it's 98 and 51.
So
Those are big
even if
numbers.
all these houses we're talking about, let's just say your Noblesville, if all of those 100 and whatever 200 houses you sold today, those are our numbers.
But think about this.
95 average days on market.
So Noblesville is the higher number, significantly, and I picked up less inventory. So that math doesn't super math, right? You know, it's like, hey, so they're not
girl
picking
math.
up inventory, but stuff is sitting longer, and it's just, I don't know. It's. I currently don't believe I have enough data points to make a conclusion from any of it. Like, it's just me spitballing.
You might be in a period too where there's a shift. So
We'll see. I you know, and we'll see. The weird part about it is, like, it's more about, like, what am I experiencing with my current buyers and my current listings, right? To me, more than these numbers right now, because by the time these numbers matter, I'll be in January and they won't matter, right? Like, they'll be indicative of what's going on. But, like, currently right now, I have houses on the market. I have very good houses on the market. They are sitting. I'm getting one showing a week, which when I talk to a crap ton of other agents, they're like, you got one?
It's
You know what I mean?
yeah,
Like,
it's
they're like,
crickets
look at
right
you.
now. It is crickets.
Yep. And it's just really, I have buyers I'm working with, and they're just kind of like, you know, like, hey, let's take 5 days to think about it. And I love all of this stuff. But, you know, yeah, so they're like that. And they're like, you know what? Let's keep looking, but let's wait till after the holidays to make a decision. So it's like, so then those people who are on the market getting a showing from us, but like I also know in the back of my head, my person could be like very just patient. It's just really kind of interesting. But I'll also tell you this, you know, my buyers that I do currently have, every single one of them is insanely motivated.
yeah.
Mine too. They just can't
Yeah.
find what they're looking for, and
Correct.
they don't have to settle anymore.
Correct.
And that's why
Yeah.
they're just kind of like, I'll wait for the next one. And I just had an appointment yesterday. I was telling you guys earlier with a seller. The first time I've sat down and said we need to talk about a price drop, and I haven't done that in 4 years because we just always hit it. This one is a really weird outlier anyway, but to have that conversation, and I furthered with what I used to do, and I said, but if in 30 days. Will you agree that we go down another 25,000 if we're not there? I haven't done that in 4 years.
Yeah. We'll see what happens. I don't know. I'm glad you came on.
Yeah, it's always
Yeah, I
good.
appreciate it.
I'd like to have you on mid-year too, so we
Yeah.
can actually, you know, it's neat to do it at the end of the year and reflect back, but I think it would also be neat to do it in the middle of the year and kind of.
What did you say and where are we really?
Yeah.
But
yeah.
also I wanted to say, you can explain, because a lot of the agents are the ones listening, is that you do go around and help brokerages and stuff like that to give the same information. So maybe you can
Yeah,
kind of
absolutely.
explain what you do and what you offer, because people, you know, you have a brain to pick, and it's really a lot of good information.
Oh, well, thank you. Some of them kind of want to know just generally the trends, or some of them want to know what the tools that they have within Mibor, kind of what they can access, how to use it, what's the appropriate cases to be able to use them within. So we cover that a lot of times too. Sometimes they just want to bring everybody up to date on kind of generally where we are with the market, where the economy is, how things look. Also kind of help just be able to pull out some of the numbers that they should be looking at, that they should just be keeping an eye on, how to track them, how to look at them, how to talk about them.
I think that's excellent for every brokerage to have you in.
I just wish people would listen, you know, like when you're talking about these types of days on market, when do you actually make the price adjustment? At what point are we hurting ourselves and our sellers or buyers because somebody may not know the market and they're dropping price
At
too
10 days.
rapidly. So then,
Yeah, 10
I mean,
days,
all of
something
these
like
things
that.
affect your data points and
Yep.
like the state of the market when, like you shouldn't have even dropped it in the first place. So when you drop it, when you should have dropped it, it was actually your second drop, right?
Yeah.
And like there's just a lot there. But we have, I mean,
It's better
got
than
busy
having
jobs,
the round tables, because I know a lot of times they'll have like meetings or whatever, or anyway, just round tables where 4 agents say what they think. But unfortunately, many of them are saying what they think based on what they thought from the past, whereas you are telling the absolute, like, here's the stats, use them how you want.
I'll get to like one person who's like sells like one house a year and be like, I don't know, I had this experience, and I'm like, man, that's just not the pulse of the market. No offense,
not where
you
we
know.
are.
Yeah, that's like, I love your information, but
Right.
like, hey, that was the outlier, you know. So
It was correct then.
yeah. So
Well, thank you so
Well, thank
much.
you.
We love having you on, and anybody take advantage of him. He's Brad. He's got so much to offer, and more than we ever dive into. But to know where it is in market insights, I know a lot of agents don't know about market insights when I mention it or when it gets brought up. So
if you don't know market insights, it'd be like being a stock trader without like watching stocks.
yeah,
With that,
but it's true
Bloomberg
because I hear
terminal.
it.
Yeah.
So that's out there, and he talks about it highly. So if you need help with that at your brokerages, how to use it,
Yeah.
he's your guy.
Definitely
But
so.
give them your information, how they can get a hold of you.
Easiest way, and the email is super tricky. Are you ready for this one?
Yeah.
bradcoffing at
Mibor.
mybor.com.
I have to say
At
Mibor
AOL.com.
because Siri does not understand Mibor, so I have to say Mibor.
Bradcoffing at Mybor.
Coughing, not
Yes.
coffee.
Coffing.
Do people say coffee a lot?
When I was a teacher, because
You were a teacher?
Yeah, I was a teacher for a while.
What'd
Kids
you
are
teach?
super clever. Coffee. Yeah,
That's pretty good.
I know. So,
I want to have you back on here what people called you.
I know we can talk about that. Yeah, the whole teaching thing.
Yeah,
I
That's
know
awesome.
better than you. I know the
fun
stats.
stuff. Yeah.
And I'm Kyle Morris with Morris Property Group and FC Tucker. My number is 317-649-5122.
I'm Shelly Walters with the Shelly Walters Realty Group. My phone number is 317-201-2601. See you next week.